Welcome back. Next up, we've got what is probably the most important section in the course, or at least the most useful as far as the ChatGPT content goes. We're going to talk about prompt engineering, which is basically what it sounds like, writing or engineering the best possible prompts. It's the process of optimizing our input prompts so that we can get the best output, the best results. And it's not specific to ChatGPT. That's what we'll be talking about prompt engineering in the context of ChatGPT. But the general practice of prompt engineering applies to any large language model. ChatGPT is just the most popular. And like any sort of engineering, or really anything in life, it is an iterative process where you try something, it may work, but it probably can be improved. And you can improve it, make it better, and try it again, and you keep iterating until you're happy with the result. The quality of your input, the actual prompt that you write, can lead to much better output. So it's really important, right? The only way we can communicate with ChatGPT is through a prompt. And if our prompts are lacking, then our results are lacking. So it's a critical part of working with ChatGPT. It's super useful, but it's also really not that hard. There are courses and books and blog posts and YouTube videos and TikToks trying to sell you on all sorts of crazy garbage around prompt engineering, but it's kind of straightforward. There's a lot of BS in the world of ChatGPT education. There's just a vacuum where there's, a new topic exists out of nowhere. And there's a lot of people who see an opportunity to make money by trying to sell you stuff you don't need or teach you things that you don't really need to worry about. You'll see things like, the 100 incredible prompts that will change your life. Or the worst ones are the ones that promise to make you money. The ultimate money-making ChatGPT prompts, where they're not even really teaching you how to engineer or write a good prompt. They're just selling you a list of prompts or a course, with 100 different prompts in it. There's not a lot of value there, to be honest, because most of them are super specific. Things like, for example, how to write the perfect travel agent prompt to brainstorm a family trip to Disney World using ChatGPT. Do you need to know that? Probably not. It's not that effective to watch somebody write 100 different possible ChatGPT prompts in all the different scenarios. It's really boring and very specific, super niche. So that's exactly what a lot of courses do, is they'll have a whole section on marketing prompts and copywriting prompts and email prompts and resume enhancement prompts and blog post generating prompts. And they're just super bloated, impossible to make it through without falling asleep, but also not that useful. Again, what matters the most is understanding how to write a good prompt. What's a formula to writing a good prompt? Not memorizing hundreds of pre-written prompts other people have done. You can find a prompt for anything online, just by Googling it. But what really helps as far as writing your own good prompts is understanding the key ingredients. And there's really just 4 main key ingredients that we'll talk about in the next video. This whole section is about this winning prompt formula, which honestly sounds kind of salesman scam-like already as I say it, but it's just the key ingredients that you can use to build any prompt. And then I'll have some more specific tips as a separate section, but a lot of those don't apply very often. So that's something I've struggled with here is, I want to show stuff that's useful, and there's some niche things that are useful, but I am not going to do 10 hours of just one prompt after another where I'm boring you to death, and there's not a lot of value there. So this section is getting started with prompt engineering. What are the things that really help to put in a prompt? So let's talk about the ingredients that you can use to make a good prompt. Any prompt, not specific to one genre or one purpose, but just generally the ingredients that make a good prompt. There's 4 main pieces, and they don't always all have to be there. You don't need all of them to make a good prompt, but the 4 categories of information are the initial context or the initializer, the instructions, the task that you're asking the model to perform, any input data, and then constraints and formatting rules. So those 4 things can work together to build pretty much any good prompt on any topic. In this video, we'll talk about the initial context, what that means. So when we're dealing with ChatGPT, remember that this is a model that doesn't really have one specific task, right? It's not trained to be a code enhancing engine or a English translating model or a travel agent or an email writer. It's a general purpose large language model. What can be useful is to give it some specific role. a job, not just the task that's coming next, but instead we can give it some initial context. You are a plagiarism checker. Imagine you are a screenwriter. Act as an English translator and tutor, or sometimes you can just give it some initial context that is actually setting the stage for us, the user. I'm in a horrible mood today, or I'm a junior web developer trying to ace the coding interview, or I run a company and need help doing X. So you give the model some initial context before asking your question or whatever the task is, which is the second part of the prompt we'll cover in the next video. Initializing this context is as simple as saying something like, act as a JavaScript and React expert, or you are a writing tutor that helps people improve their spelling, writing, and tone. We still haven't provided actual instructions or a task, right? We haven't said correct this sentence or write me an essay or something like that. We've just set the scene and said, this is your job, because it is this omni tool, right, that can do so many things. By narrowing it down, we tend to get better results. We can also do silly things, act as an annoying anime-obsessed teenage boy from Ohio. I'll talk about why it's useful to use the act as syntax in a moment. I'll do that in the next video. There's a reason for it. We can also do things that maybe are a bit more useful. Imagine you are a tech industry hiring expert that specializes in getting your clients jobs at large tech companies. That could be the initial context, and then right below it, I can start to say, ask me interview questions, review my resume, write me a cover letter. There's a million things I can do, but I'm setting the scene here. I'm basically giving it details as to what its job is. But we can also do the same thing for us, the querier, the user. I'm having a terrible day and need someone to listen to me rant and complain about life. Or I am an online course creator and I make courses to help people learn coding and tech-related topics. I can give it that context to tell it a bit about me. And then, of course, the next step is to ask it to do something specific. And this might seem trivial. It is, really. It's such a simple thing to do. All of the prompt engineering concepts are pretty simple. But you put them together, you have a little recipe, a formula, you can make very good prompts. And this is just one small part. Keep that in mind. Here's another example. Act as a Python code reviewing assistant. Or act as an online marketing expert that specializes in ads targeting Gen Z. So those are just some examples. I'll show it in practice in the next video. Again, it comes down to providing some background information as to who or what the model is. You don't have to think of it as a person always, but as some sort of assistant, what type of assistant, and context as to who or what you are, the querier. So I don't want to waste your time showing you a bunch of unnecessary examples of how to set this initial context. It's pretty straightforward. Just give the model a sentence or two or more in certain situations of context as to who it is, what its role is. And you can often get away with just saying you are X. You are a writing tutor. So I'll just show that as our first example. You are an English writing tutor that helps people improve their grammar, spelling, and overall tone. And that's all I need to tell it, right? I didn't even give it a specific task yet. I didn't say fix this paragraph or write me an essay or enhance my resume. I just gave it an overall sort of mission, some context, and then I could just start chatting with it. So again, this is one part of a prompt. We're not quite there to writing a complex prompt yet, but this is one piece. However, it's not always going to work just to say you are X. You are an English writing tutor. It seems fine with that. But if I try something like you are a 12-year-old boy, it's usually, at least sometimes, going to complain and say, no, I'm actually not. I'm an AI. I don't have a physical form, age, or gender. But it will say, I could act like a 12-year-old boy if you want. So that is a strategy that you will see all over the place. Instead of telling the model exactly what it is, you can tell it to imagine it is something or act as something. So you'll see this syntax in my slides. Act as an annoying anime-obsessed teenage boy from Ohio. Imagine you are a tech industry hiring expert. Sometimes you don't need this. Sometimes it won't complain, but a lot of the time it will. And so it's much safer generally just to say, imagine you are X. Act as X. So I'll do the same thing. Act as a 12-year-old boy. And it will still usually say, okay, I'll role play. I'm still not a 12-year-old boy, but I can act as one. So And then it starts going, oh, wow, have you seen the latest video game that just came out? That's pretty much it for this video. Main takeaways here are that, well, we set the context, and that does a lot just on its own without providing a specific task. Just telling it something about us or about it, the model, and how it should behave, that sets the scene. And then also using the act as or imagine as syntax can be helpful because sometimes the model's not very happy if you tell it that it is something that it actually is not. It is not an annoying anime-obsessed teenage boy, but it can act like one. So the next piece of our prompt formula is the most important. It's the actual task, the true instruction. What is the question or the thing we want answered? Respond to this email. Improve this short story. Write a JavaScript function that generates prime numbers. Write me a cover letter. Suggest a restaurant to eat at in Paris. There's, whatever the task is, we have an actual task in the prompt. So I'm using some color coding to try and differentiate between the initial context setting and then in red, the actual question or task. So act as an online marketing expert that specializes in ads targeting Gen Z. That's setting the scene. And then the actual question or task, write a tweet promoting my new course on ChatGPT prompt engineering for beginners. Or setting the stage, you are the pastry chef in a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant. Come up with a high-concept dessert involving liquid nitrogen. So we're providing information up top, and then afterwards coming up with a specific question or task. I live in USDA Hardiness Zone 4. This is information about me, the user, right? And if you're not familiar with hardiness zones, it's as far as gardening and growing plants and fruits and vegetables, there's different zones in the US that are based on how much snow and frost and temperature and a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, I live in Zone 4. Generate me a list of dates when I should start specific vegetables as seeds and when I should transplant them outdoors. So we have the task, and then we had information up top about me this time. One more example, act as a middle school geography teacher. Write a quiz with 4 multiple choice questions about the countries of South America. Now, of course, you could just say, write a quiz with 4 multiple choice questions about the countries of South America. But if you tell it to act as a middle school geography teacher, or if you say, I am a middle school geography teacher, write me a quiz for my students, we're providing more information, more context, and we can get a much better result. Because otherwise, what skill level would it write this quiz for? Who would the audience be? Adding that little sentence up top with that context can make a big difference. Now, as far as what the actual tasks are, the possibilities are kind of limitless, right? We could ask it to summarize things, translate things, explain things, write code, extract keywords, pretty much whatever you want, tell a joke. That is not what this section is focused on, right? There's so many possibilities there. What I want to focus on here is just the structure of a prompt. So whatever you're trying to do, you have your context, initialize that context, then you have the actual task at hand, whatever the task is. We'll see plenty of examples of real prompts and writing all the stuff, from scratch, but I just want to move quickly here. With that said, I'll show a handful of quick examples. So here's an example that doesn't have any initial context. It just says, write a tweet promoting the launch of my new book called Mastering the Python Coding Interview. And it writes me a tweet. Excited to announce the launch of my latest book, Mastering the Python Coding Interview, blah, blah, blah. It's sort of generic, but it's not terrible. And then here's an example where I kept the exact same task, write a tweet promoting the launch of my new book, but right before it, I said, you are a high-profile JavaScript influencer. And the tweet that it gave me is a little bit more interesting and definitely more specific, right? Stepping outside my JavaScript comfort zone to highlight an extraordinary new resource. So it's a JavaScript influencer who's selling a Python book. Doesn't really matter if you're not familiar with either of those tools. But the point is that we get a different result by being more specific and providing some initial context. Then, of course, we can get way more varied with the actual tasks that we give it. We could say, write a tweet promoting the launch of my new book, or we could do something like write, 3 tweets. That's a simple example, but we'll get a very different output. 3 tweets promoting the launch of my new book. And while that's going, we could try something completely different. Write me a script for a 30-second TikTok video to teach people about, let's say, JavaScript variables and let versus const. So same initial context, you're a high-profile JavaScript and coding influencer, very, very different task. And we'll see how it does. By the way, here's our 3 tweets. So 3 completely different tweets. They're all kind of similar because it's all about the same topic. It's not the most inspiring, but 3 different tweets. We've got emojis in there. We could tell it not to include emojis. There's a whole bunch of things we can do as far as the format. So I know that this video is pretty obvious, right? You can provide a task to ChatGPT, and you should provide a task. That goes without saying. What I think makes more of an impact is having that task preceding it with some sort of context, some general information. And here's the TikTok script that it wrote for me. Not too bad. The next component in a good prompt is any necessary input data. Now, not every prompt needs this, but a lot of the time you'll have some information that you need to provide to the model. So you have your instructions, you have the context, the instructions, and then you have the input data. And it's recommended that you do follow this order. You have your context set first, then the task, and then any input data. So let me just show you an example here, something like this. You are a spelling and grammar checking assistant. That's setting the context. Given the following input text, please correct any mistakes and improve the overall quality of the writing. That is the task. And then we have the actual input data. My name is called Steele and I have too many pets, a lot of spelling and grammar issues in there. So that's the input in yellow here. It's a silly example. Here's another one. Generate an outline for a 1,000-word essay based on the following prompt. And then we have the actual input. How will ChatGPT change the ways we work? It can sometimes be useful to wrap your input, if it's actual text, wrap the input in quotes, or do something like this right here. Act as the world's best cover letter writer. So that's our initial context. Then we have the task. I will give you the job description for a role I'm applying for, and you will write me a concise and effective cover letter. And then, instead of just including the job description, we can say, here is the job description, just to make it clear. Sometimes the model can get tripped up when there's just a bunch of text, and some of the text is instructions, and some of the text is data. So it can be useful to separate it out and say, here is the description, or even just write the word description : It's very flexible, but that's one example. So let's try that. Let's find a job description. I'm on the OpenAI website. Let's say I want to become a research scientist at OpenAI. I can take all this information. I don't know how much of this. Wow, that's a pretty nice compensation range. Let's see how much of this we want. Probably just the about the role, we expect you, and nice to have maybe. Let's just start with that, just for the sake of time. So act as the world's best cover letter writer. That's our initial context. I will give you the job description for a role I'm applying for, and you will write me a concise and effective cover letter. Then, I'm hitting Shift Enter, by the way, just to format this for myself. I can then provide here, let's see, here's the job description. And then I'll just paste it here. And that should do it for me. So as long as I'm telling it, this is now separate from all the instructions. It usually can figure it out anyway, but by using this signifier, here is the description, it can be helpful. Another thing you'll see some people do is separate their instructions from their data using some sort of character, an arrow or an equal sign, dashes. There's a lot of options. It doesn't really matter. Now let's see what it does. Okay, so it wrote me a cover letter. It is, I've already read it. It's decent. There are some problems. Of course, first of all, it just leaves space for us to put our name and contact info in, which makes sense. But also, it kind of lies. We didn't give it any specific details about us, the user, or the person that the cover letter is being written for, and that's something we could definitely provide as input. This video is not really about writing a cover letter writing prompt. We'll have a separate video later on when I talk about, specific prompts, and one of those prompts will be a resume and cover letter writing prompt. That's not the focus here. The main takeaway from this video is just the concept of providing input data, of being able to say, here is your context, here is your job or your task, and here's the information you need to complete it. Here's your input data. And there's many different formats. You can provide data as text like this. You can provide data as a table, as JSON, as code. We'll see some of those examples later. For now, just know we often need to provide data. There's one more component to good prompts, or at least some good prompts, which is adding in any constraints and output formatting information. So in addition to the actual task, write me a resume or make me a list of coffee shop names, we also can specify requirements that further narrow down or restrict the type of output we want. Make me a numbered list. Make me a comma-separated list. Use 2 to 3 sentences. Respond only with certain words, yes or no. Generate me a table. Generate me Markdown content. Write me a Python function. There are so many different ways that we can constrain the output that we get. So a simple example, explain microprocessors. That's the task. To a middle schooler using fewer than 200 characters. That's not easy to do, but we're constraining it. Tell me a joke. Your output should contain every letter of the alphabet at least once. So a pretty serious constraint there. I don't know why we would do that, but it is a fun demo. It does work. And it's a serious restriction on the type of output it can generate. Now, here's a more useful example. Up top, I'm setting the context, right? I'm initializing the scene. You are leading an interview for a front-end developer role at a tech company. I will be the candidate, and you will ask me interview questions. And then we have restrictions on how it should work. Ask me one question at a time. Once I have responded, rate my answer to your question on a scale from 1 to 10, and then ask the next question. So a lot of this is it blends together. You kind of intertwine the restrictions or the constraints with the actual instructions. I'm just trying to identify these key elements that can make up a prompt. So here's another one. We set the scene, the context, act as a news article summarizer. Then we have the instructions. I will provide you with an article and you will create a summary of the main points, and then certain constraints on the output. Your summary should include a 2-sentence overview of the article and then 4 to 6 bullet points. Your summary should not include any direct quotes from the paper. Your response should be no more than 100 words. Here is the article text. So at this point, I'm providing the input data. So this prompt actually includes all the different aspects we've talked about. Initializing the context, providing the actual instructions, providing input data, which presumably would come after this. It just was too long to fit into this slide. And then restricting the output or constraining it. One more example, write a 3-paragraph blog post on why live coding interviews are a terrible method of assessing developer candidates. So that is the task. And then this one's a little different. Your response should be formatted as Markdown. We'll talk more about Markdown as a separate video, but this is another output format that we can specify. And something that can be useful sometimes is to basically show the format that you want, to visualize the exact syntax. Now, a lot of the time, you just want to generate text, paragraphs of text. It doesn't really matter how it's formatted, but if you ever need something specific, and this comes up a lot if you're working with things like Excel, you're working with programming languages, JSON, comma-separated lists, SQL, where you need an exact format for the output, you can actually show it what you want. So generate me a list of 10 potential names for a ski town coffee shop and bakery. Sure, maybe we're starting a new business. And then I say, here is the output format I want. And if we use this syntax with the angle braces, this is just one option. It's smart enough to know that these are going to be replaced with actual names. So it's just another way of specifying the format, right? So I could do something like generate me a list of the top 10, deadliest reptiles. And usually it's going to give me a numbered list by default, although it's going to hedge a bunch and tell me that it's hard to say what deadliest truly means, but you can see it's giving me a numbered list. And maybe this is what I want, but if I'm doing something, and this is a very specific example, but if I'm doing something where I just want the names, I don't need all this explanation, all this paragraph stuff. I can get more specific. I can even just tell it, all right, stop. And I can say, generate me a list of the top 10 deadliest reptiles, only include the name of the animal. So I'm specifying some of the format here, and follow this output format. And then I'll just do name 1, comma, name 2, comma, name 3, and we'll get a very different result, as you can see right here. And as soon as I hit stop, I could even tweak this. Oops, stop generating. And I could come up with a completely different format if I wanted to. If I want them to be separated by arrows, I don't know why I would do this, but I can, and you can see it works just fine. So the point here is not that this is particularly useful, but it is very useful to specify output formatting in general. And we'll do this in pretty much all of the prompts we write. It helps to be specific about what you want. Sometimes you do have a specific format you have to adhere to, but other times it's more about setting constraints as to the length or the audience, right? So I want a 2-sentence overview, then I want bullet points. Don't use direct quotes from a paper. Make sure the whole response is under 100 words. This is not as specific, I would say, as specifying this format, but it still is specifying a format, specifying the output, how we want the output to look, what it should contain. And this is a really important part of pretty much any prompt that you'll write. Okay, so let's try putting some of these pieces together to build a prompt. Let's do an article summarizer, a Wikipedia summarizer, some sort of summarizer to start. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I have a large article that I've copied the text of onto my clipboard. It's an article it's from TechCrunch, the startup Anthropic, I don't know how you actually say it. It's a sort of an OpenAI competitor that has just raised a big round, a Series C of $450 million. But it's a much longer article. I want to get the key points, but I don't want to have to read them all myself. So what I'm going to do is ask ChatGPT to do it. And, this could be honestly useful, especially if you save the prompt somewhere, then you can just rerun it with a different article each time. So I would start with our initializer, right? What's the initial context? Where I'm going to say you are or act as a article summarizing assistant. Okay. And then the next step is going to be the actual instructions. I will provide you with the text of a news article, and I'd like you to generate a summary. Act as an article summarizing assistant. Now what I'm going to do is give it the constraints. So I could give it the article first. This is something I see people do sometimes where they'll put here is the article, and then put the article in here, and then at the very end say, make sure the summary is X and Y, 200 characters, has bullet points, no more than 10 sentences, whatever the rules are. I find that it's much better to put your input data as the last thing whenever possible. There's less chance of it getting confused, so I can put all of my sort of prompt instructions up top, the constraints, and then at the end, give it the data. So up here, I'll set my constraints, and it's up to us, but I'm thinking I want, some bullet points, so I'm going to tell it that. I'd like you to generate the summary. The summary should let's start with should include maybe a 2-sentence overall summary, and then also include 4 to 6 bullet points summarizing the key aspects, the key points of the article. Okay, we can start with that. So we have our initial scene setting. We have the actual instructions. I want you to make me a summary. And then we have the specific constraints, a 2-sentence overall summary, and also 4 to 6 bullet points summarizing the key points of the article. Your total output, and then I'm going to say should not exceed 200 words, 100 words, 120 words, some limit there. So I don't want a massive summary. And then finally, I'll say here is the article text and provide that text. And then I can just paste it in. I like to definitely do it on a new line. And what you'll see some people do is actually separate their input data from the rest of the prompt using a character like this, or some of the documentation on OpenAI will use hash symbols, octothorpes. Anything works. It's just a way to differentiate the stuff I'm saying versus the actual article content. Then I'll place or paste the article in there, and I'll hit enter. And it'll take a little bit, but we should get a nice response. So here's our first summary. Generative AI startup Anthropic, co-founded by OpenAI veterans, has secured $450 million in a Series C funding round. Okay. And then we have the key points. What do we get? 5 individual bullet points. So a pretty simple example of writing a prompt, but it does include a lot of what we've just covered. So I'm not trying to tell you this prompt will change your life necessarily, but it includes the sort of act as or imagine, here's the context declaration, the initial context, an actual prompt instruction, a query, some sort of task, summarize a news article, some constraints on the output and how it should be formatted, its length, and then some input. In this video, I'm going to show how we can use ChatGPT to summarize YouTube videos using the transcripts from a YouTube video. So this is a YouTube video by one of my friends, Kyle. He runs a channel called Web Dev Simplified. He put out a 12-minute video on our new frameworks replacing React. Now, he makes very good videos, but I don't have time to watch that. So what I can do is go down to any YouTube video that has any sort of subtitles, click this More button, and go to Show Transcript. And unfortunately, there's no easy way just to copy the transcript with a single click. I have to scroll and highlight all of this. It's still faster, probably, than watching the entire video. And then I'll copy that and keep it on my clipboard. Now, I'm going to write my prompt. We'll do something like, you are a YouTube video transcript summarizer. I will provide you with the transcript of a YouTube video, and you should generate a summary of the video's contents. Now, that's our basic setup, right? The initial context and then the actual instructions, or the task. I'm going to provide the video transcript at the end, so I can go ahead and put that in here. I'll just hit Shift Return a couple of times, and then I'll throw the data in. This is the transcript, and I'll even, space it out maybe with some characters. I'll put the transcript in there. There we go. And then I can tell it exactly what sort of format I want, right? That's the final piece we discussed, specifying the constraints in the format. Honestly, I could be fine with just any sort of summary that it generates me, but I could also give it more details. Your summary should be concise and no more than 200 words. And I'll say the summary should be a series of bullet points, if that's what we want. It's kind of similar to what we did in the previous videos, but a series of bullet points, just to show another example. Okay, so I have not seen this video, to be clear. I've skipped around a couple of times, so this is a somewhat real example, because I love you, Kyle, but I'm not going to watch 12 minutes. I don't know if I've ever watched a 12-minute YouTube video. My attention span is completely destroyed. But it's giving me some really nice bullet points. So the video introduces the JS ecosystem, questions whether React is becoming outdated due to new frameworks. He concludes it's not dying. Its retention percentage is high. I mean, you can read this, right? There's no, you may not know what React is. It doesn't really matter. You can put any YouTube video in here if you can get a transcript. We can also do this with more complex transcriptions, including things from podcasts. A lot of podcasts today will include on their website all sorts of free transcriptions of the actual podcast contents. One of the most popular podcasts that does this is the podcast This American Life, which I actually really enjoy listening to. I probably wouldn't need a summary of an episode. But what I can do is take some of this transcript. Now, you'll run into trouble if you try and summarize the entire hour episode. And we've talked about this before, that you can't just feed it a full book, right? There's a maximum size in terms of the number of tokens, and a full podcast that's an hour long is far too long. But there's a chunk in here that's like a 20-minute interview. I've already copied it onto my clipboard. This guy, Shalom Oslander, and Ira Glass, the host, they're having a conversation. Really, it's mostly Shalom telling a story about one hockey game that he tried to go to, I think is what it was. Anyway, if I wanted to generate me a summary following this pattern that we've been doing, we'll start with, you are a podcast summarizing assistant. Given a podcast transcript, please generate a summary of the podcast. And then let's get more detailed. In addition to the summary of the podcast's contents, also include a summary of how many speakers were involved and how many words each speaker said. I don't know if we really care about that, but just to get a sense of, how one-sided the conversation is, just as another example. And then I'll say, here is the transcript. And then I paste the transcript in here, and you can see the format. It has the speaker's name, and then what they say, and then the speaker name and what they say. So let's see what happens. I'm going to click Regenerate Response. Okay, let's see how it goes. Tells us a bit about the episode, about Shalom, the story, or Orthodox Jews who wanted to go to a soccer game or a hockey game, but it was on the Sabbath, so they couldn't drive there. They decided to walk 14 miles. And then we can see the approximate word count. Now, I don't really have an easy way of checking this, but it seems relatively accurate that, the guy being interviewed said twice as many words as the interviewer. So just another example of providing transcripts and getting a summary. And yet another example of this basic pattern, a template, a formula for a prompt. You give it the initial context, you initialize it, you say this is what you are, this is what you do, and then we give it a specific task, generate a summary, and then any constraints in addition to that task, how many words, what tone we want, who's the audience, what format, and then any input data, which in this case was the podcast transcript. Welcome back, everyone. So in the previous section, we talked about a basic formula to write a good prompt. It's pretty straightforward. Initialize the context, provide the actual task, any input data, and finally any constraints and formatting rules. That's a general recipe. Now what I want to do is show you some specific techniques. And I'm breaking this down into two sections, the really, truly useful prompting techniques, and then the sometimes useful prompting techniques that I personally don't find as valuable or are more niche. So I've seen other courses, they'll just have like 50 videos in one massive section about prompt engineering. Most of it is like, here's just one really specific, bizarre thing you can do in a prompt that's not that useful. What I'm trying to do here is call your attention to the stuff that matters, and then also just give you some of the more niche things if you're interested, but I don't want to waste your time. So this section, just to be clear, is the actually useful techniques. And the first of these techniques is something called one-shot or few-shot prompting. These terms of n-shot prompting are actually originated from different ways of training models, and then they've kind of been co-opted in the world of prompting. And it has to do with how many examples we provide to the model in our prompt. So here's an example of a zero-shot prompt. This means that there are no examples. We're not showing the model at any point what we want. We're just telling it and assuming it will figure it out. So classify the sentiment in the following tweet, and then a tweet. Sentiment analysis is a somewhat common thing to do where we take a piece of text, a tweet, a Reddit post, a blog post, whatever, and we try and figure out what is the sentiment of this content? Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative? Is it neutral? And there's different schools of thought for how you actually do that. Do you assign a numeric value? Is it just positive or negative? Is it just positive, negative, neutral? But anyway, I'm asking the model to classify the sentiment in this tweet. And this can work just fine. So this is an example of something called zero-shot prompting. There's no examples that we're providing. Compare that to this example here, this other prompt that's very similar. It says you are a sentiment analysis assistant, given a tweet, respond with the overall sentiment of the tweet. But then there's a clear example. Here's a possible input, and here's the corresponding output. So Arsenal completely gave up on winning the league this year. Output is negative. So we give it an example, and then we prompt it, right? We say input, at least I'm looking forward to next season. Come on, Arsenal. And then output, we let it fill in that blank. And the concept here, the goal is that it can learn, it can understand, oh, I just want to give you the word negative as the output. That's just one example here. If I didn't do this, the format, the type of analysis it does might be different. So let me just show that. I'm just going to make up a tweet, analyze the sentiment in the following tweet. And my tweet will be something very, very negative. I really hate you. Okay, clearly it should tell us that that's negative, and it does. The sentiment in the tweet, I really hate you, is negative. The word hate, it gives me a whole explanation. But maybe I don't want the whole explanation. Maybe I just want a single word. Negative, positive, or neutral, it's much easier to, automate and put it in a database, and it's just friendlier to work with instead of this whole paragraph. This is kind of a trivial, contrived example, but it is an example nonetheless. So I could instead say, analyze the following tweet, I really hate you. But before that, I can give it some examples and say, here's an input. We are so happy to be here. I don't know who would tweet that. And then I can say the corresponding output is the word positive. And then I can say, here's your input. What is the corresponding output? So let's try this. Now I just get the word negative, right? So it learned, or it didn't really teach it anything, but it figured out the format that I want based on my example. This is what we would call a one-shot prompt. Shot just means how many examples you provide. So the first attempt was 0 shot. This is 1 shot where I'm giving it an example, but just one. And if I had 2, it would be 2 shot, or any more, 3 shot, or some people would use the word few shot. But the concept is that shots refers to examples in the prompt, and this can be useful. And we saw here, this, maybe it's useful, but we could have probably gotten away with just saying only respond with the word positive, neutral, or negative. That would be just as easy instead of providing an example. But let me show you something that is also contrived, but would be harder to explain. I'm going to come up with some weird format where I want it to translate AAA into the phrase or the word BBB. So it's going to shift every letter. For example, if I had, CSS, it should translate that where it shifts the letter C forward to a D. Whoops. It should become D, and then the S's become T's. So it's just moving every letter, one letter forward in the alphabet. And I could try and describe that. I could say, take this word and move each letter forward one letter in the alphabet. It might be a little hard to explain. And this is just a silly, trivial example. Or what I could do is say, translate the following. And of course, if I just wrote like ABC, it's not going to know how to translate it. But if I give it an example, let's say ABC, and I'll use the arrow syntax. This is just one way of showing this, the before and the after, the input and the output. ABC should become BCD. And we'll do one more example. How about X, I don't know. How about the word LOL? What comes after L? HIJKL-M. And then after O is LMNOP, right? So LOL becomes MPM. And I'm just showing it. Here's 2 examples. And then I can have it translate, CAT. And I'll put the arrow there and have it translate. So this would be an example of a few shot prompt where I'm giving it 2 examples. Let's see if it gets it right. DBU, that seems right to me, right? C becomes D, it moves forward. A moves forward to B, and T moves forward to U. Again, contrived. But I didn't have to explain what I wanted. I didn't have to try and put it into words. I just showed it an example. So this can be powerful. When you have some format that you want and it's having trouble picking up on it, you can show it. Just here's an input and here's the corresponding output theoretically you would have given me. Or you can use the actual words input and output. You can kind of structure it however you want. But having these examples can make a big difference. I don't start with them. I always start with no examples. And then if I run into trouble, then I can try adding an example. If it's not doing what I want, I'll add another example. The more examples, the more verbose your prompt is, but generally the better results you can get. The next tool or technique or strategy, whatever you want to call it, has to do with showing an output example. So it's kind of tied to what we just saw, end-shot, one-shot, few-shot prompting. But end-shot prompting is about showing an input and a corresponding output. Sometimes I just want to give it a template for the output format. If I want some specific output format, there's ways I can do this without having to show the relationship between an input and an output. So I think it's easiest if I just show this. Let's ask it to generate me a song, a playlist of songs. Generate me a playlist. Let's zoom in a bit. of 10 songs to play while I sail around the world. I'd love to sail around the world one day. That's the plan. Not there yet. So if I just hit enter, it's going to come up with some format. And it's likely going to have, Sail, and that's the song, and then the artist. Ocean Eyes by Billie Eilish. It better have Southern Cross in here. That's a quintessential circumnavigation song. Anyway, it has the song title, and then the word by, and then the band or the artist. If I want a different format, for some reason, the search tool I'm using or Spotify or whatever has a particular format, I'm going to stop this generating. What I could do is show it that format. So I'll edit my prompt, and I can simply say, use this format for each song. And then I can write the format. There's a couple of options for how I do this. A lot of people like to do this where they use angle brackets to signify replace this with a song title. So maybe I want something like this, hello, and then the year. I don't know when Adele's Hello song came out. I have no idea. And then I can have the artist. Let's suppose this is the format I want. The song title, then in parentheses, the year, then a dash, or maybe we'll even get fancier. For some reason, I want an arrow. And then I want the artist name. So I can show it exactly that format. Here's the song title, and then I'll put parentheses. And in those parens, I'll write song year, or even just release year or year. It's pretty smart. It can figure out what I mean by this. And then I'll do an arrow, and then I'll have artist. So unlike the previous video, I'm not showing it an input and a corresponding output. I'm just giving it basically a template. Use this basic format. And let's see what happens. There we are. Come sail away. And then in parentheses the year, and then a random arrow, and then the artist name. And there we go. Southern Cross, 1982 in parentheses, an arrow, and then Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So that's a simple example. I can do this in many different formats. You can often get away by just doing this as well. It can figure out what you want. I could probably just do title, and then year, in parentheses, an arrow, and then artist, and it will still give me the same format. Yep. Still works just fine. But a lot of people like to use those angle brackets just to make it clear, maybe also to other users, that it's a variable or it's supposed to be replaced. So let's look at one more example of providing a template for the output. I'm going to ask it to generate me some sample data, maybe some 5 fake users. And I want each user to have like a name and an email and maybe a birth date and different pieces of data. Maybe I want to use this for an application I'm building, some testing purposes. So I could start by saying, generate me 5 sample users. Maybe I'll just start with that. Generate me 5 sample users. Let's see what it gives us. So age, occupation, interests, location, and it's giving it to me in a numbered list. So I'm going to stop it, and I have more specific things that I want. So of course I could say generate me 5 sample users. Each user should have an age, an occupation, interest, and location. But I can also just show an example according to this format. And then I can have a basic format where I'll say, first name, colon, last name, colon, email, and what else? Maybe birth date. Just showing it that basic format that I want is enough. And it will generate me 5 users according to that format. It gives me a disclaimer saying these aren't real people. But there we go. First name, last name, email, and birth date. But maybe I actually want this to work with code. So if you're not a developer at all, it doesn't matter. But I could ask it to generate me a code-friendly format. So I'll tell it to generate me 5 sample users as JSON. Again, not a big deal if you don't know JSON. And I'll say each user should follow this format. And then what I can do is just write a little bit of JSON. Basically, I wrap this in curly braces, and I'll indent this just to make it look like JSON. And you'll see that it gives me a slightly different result now. Perfect. So now it's giving me a JSON array of individual user pieces of information, user objects. I could take this and use it in some programming language like JavaScript or Python. So it doesn't matter if you don't know code, but simply providing this template here without showing a true example, right? I'm not saying here's an input, here's an output. It still is very effective just to show it the general format that I want my output in. And that can be some super specific, really niche output, or it could be something that's pretty obvious and you can just put it in there to guarantee that you get that format. Because sometimes you'll run the same prompt, like I've asked it for a playlist a couple of times without providing a format, and it will change the order. Sometimes it does the song and then the year, then the artist. Sometimes it doesn't include the year at all. But if I give it the exact format, I can get some repeatable output. One strategy that's quite simple but also very effective is to ask the model to ask us, the querier, any follow-up questions. So whatever the actual task is, generate me a business plan, or give me feedback on my resume, or write a cover letter, or write me a tweet, or write me code, whatever it is, we can then tell it, here's your task. Before you actually do it, ask me any follow-up questions, and as many as you want, to gather more information, to fill out any holes in the knowledge or any issues in the prompt, and generate the best possible result. This is a nice thing you can add on to pretty much any prompt. Not everyone needs it. I tend to only do this for the more complicated prompts that I'm writing. If I'm trying to get it to draft me text specifically, like for a marketing copy or for a script for a video, things that are a bit more detailed, I'll ask it to ask me questions. But if I'm just trying to get like a translation of something or a quick summary of an article, it's probably not worth going through that process, but it can be useful. So let's try a quick example of this. This is generally more useful on a more complicated prompt where there's a whole bunch of extra information you might not consider. Why not let the model figure that information out and just get it from you? So I'm going to ask it to write me a script for a YouTube video. I have a YouTube channel that is moderately successful, not really successful. It does okay, but it's a huge effort to make a video for me. Compared to making courses, I just suck at making YouTube videos. I'll start with some context about myself. I'm a coding YouTube video creator. You are an expert at writing scripts for YouTube videos. Draft me a script for let's say a 5-minute YouTube video that teaches people, I do, coding education on my YouTube channel. So let's say teaches people about the differences between Python and JavaScript. Okay. And I could just start with that, but I'm going to add in the before answering me, ask as many follow-up questions as needed to gather information and generate the best possible result. And it's going to come up with a whole bunch of important questions, just things I probably wouldn't have considered. So let's see. It's asking me, do I have a target audience? Do I want to focus on technical differences, practical key use cases, or both? Is there a format that I prefer? Any specific areas in the languages you want to emphasize? So the way that I can respond here is by just using the numbers. So I'll say, do you have a target audience in mind? My audience is mostly intermediate programmers. Most of them know more JS than Python. And then I can answer the second question. Would you prefer to focus more on technical differences? I'll say both, technical differences and practical use cases. Is there a format that I prefer? Let's do a direct comparison. Any specific areas? Let's say focus on the libraries, community, and use cases. 5, do you have a specific style? My style is informal with a little humor. I don't take myself too seriously. 6, is there any prerequisite knowledge you want the viewers to have? I'll say viewers should know a little bit of programming. Again, this is all kind of rushed. You could provide way more thorough answers. Do you want to include, it's blocking, what does it say? I can't read it. I think I'm too far zoomed in. Do you want to include any interactive elements like quizzes or exercises? Let's see what it does. No! I did not mean to hit enter. I accidentally hit enter too soon. Let's tell it. Let's include a quiz or two. All right. So save and submit. I have to stop generating here. Save and submit. Let's see how that goes. It should give us a pretty decent script. We gave it a lot of details. But I wouldn't have thought, I mean, I could have if I sat down and really tried to come up with all the different information to provide it. In the perfect world, I would just know to tell it this stuff. But it helps when it just asks me the questions. It makes it pretty easy. So here's a script. We're not going to go over the whole thing. And it maybe leaned a little too hard into the humor, if you want to call it humor. We're serving a spicy dish, a showdown between two titans, Python and JavaScript. And no, it's not a jungle fight. It's a battle of languages. Yeah, it's a little over the top for me. So I could easily just say, please rewrite it with less humor. I'll just say that. And there we go. Now I can't attest to how great this video would be. I'd have to read it, and you keep sort of iterating back and forth and conversing with the model. But for these more complex prompts, I find it can be pretty useful to tell the model, ask me any questions that you have. The next tip or strategy or whatever we want to call these videos that I'll show you is around working with tables. So ChatGPT can accept tables as an input and also generate tables as an output. So I'll show some examples of this. Let's start with generating tables. I'm going to ask GPT-4 to generate me, just to start, generate me a list of, 6 colors. Let's say 6 pretty colors that go together nicely. Give me their name, the RGB color code, the HSL color code, and the hexadecimal color code. If you don't know all these formats, it's okay. It's just I'm trying to get some tabular data. So their name, RGB color code, HSL color code, and hexadecimal code. So let's see what it generates me to start. Here are 6 colors. Okay, so it gives me basically a nested list, right? So coral, here's the RGB version, here's the HSL version, here's the hexadecimal version. And I guess we can let it keep going. I want it to instead give me a table. It's kind of going slowly here, so maybe I should stop it. All right, I'll just stop it, and I'll say, generate me a table. And that's all I need to say, and it should be able to generate me a table. And here we are. It takes a bit, but it's working on it. It's making me a nice table. Okay, it finished up, and here's my table. Now, if we look closely at this, if I actually copy this content, and I'll just paste it in here so you can take a look, this is what it actually generates. This type of table here, this is what's known as a Markdown table. So Markdown is a special syntax that we can use to generate HTML content very easily. And we'll talk a little bit more about Markdown actually in the next video. One of the features of Markdown is that we can create tables using this syntax. So we can export, if you want to call it export, we can copy a table out of ChatGPT as this Markdown format and use it anywhere else that Markdown is supported. But we can also write our own tables and provide them in this format, and ChatGPT will understand them. And if you struggle to create a table like this, there are tools out there, lots of free tools online that help you generate Markdown tables. So I'll make a 4-column table, and I'll have some headings. It just says A, B, C, and D, and then some text in here just as an example. If I click generate, it generates the Markdown table for me that I can then copy and use. But I can also actually just use ChatGPT to format a table for me correctly. So if I do have some data that I want to pass in as a table, I can basically just make up my own format and say something like, let's go with item, so product, and then price. And I'll just have a product name like Apple, and then price will be 2.5, and pair will be 2, And I don't know, grapes. This is a silly example, but grapes will be 3.25. Okay, so it should be able to figure out that this is supposed to be a table. I can tell it, given the following table, what is the most expensive item? And let's see how that works. Should be able to figure it out. The most expensive item is grapes with a price of $3.25. And then I can even say something like, can you format the data as a real Markdown table? And now it makes me the true Markdown table. Remember, it just renders it to look nice. That's kind of the point of Markdown. It's a very quick way to generate HTML. But underneath this, when I copy it, it's just a Markdown table using this kind of funky syntax where you use pipe characters and dashes, and it turns it into a nice looking table. Anyway, there's a lot you can do with tables. This video maybe isn't particularly persuasive as far as why you would use a table, but it shows that we can use tables, both as an input and as an output. In addition to working with Markdown tables, ChatGPT can work with any feature in the Markdown syntax. So again, if you're not really comfortable or at all familiar with Markdown, it's this nice syntax that we can use to generate structured documents very quickly. So for example, to make headings, we use the hash symbol to make a H1 level heading. We use 2 hash symbols to make a slightly smaller heading. We use 3 to make an H3. We can make bold text using double asterisks, italics using a single asterisk. You might, if nothing else, you might know Markdown from creating comments on Reddit. We can make block quotes, ordered lists, bulleted lists. We can have code blocks, horizontal rules, which are lines. You can put images in. You can put in links. There's tables, which we've already seen. There's a bunch of stuff that we can do. So the reason that I bring this up is that we can have ChatGPT generate Markdown for us and also interpret Markdown and get it as an input. So here's just an online Markdown editor. You can see things like if I use a single hash symbol, this makes me a heading. This is the rendered result over here. And then I can have some paragraphs of text. I can have a code block. Whoops. Let's do like print. Hello. Let's see if I can zoom in here. You can see it makes me a code block over here. Anyway, we can use this in the world of ChatGPT. So I could ask the model, I could say, please generate me a roughly 500 word, and let's keep it even smaller, 300 word blog post on how to use, and let's tell it, you are an expert teacher and programmer with a knack for writing great blog posts. Okay, please generate me a roughly 300 word blog post on how to use the React use state hook. Again, if you don't know React or JavaScript, don't worry. I'm just coming up with some technical content. This has nothing to do with Markdown at the moment. I'm going to tell it your output should be in Markdown format. And then I can even get more specific. Please use headings and subheadings and also correctly format code blocks. And I'll also tell it to bold any key phrases or terms. Okay, let's see how that goes. So you can already tell it's giving me Markdown because we've got a heading here. I've got paragraphs. There's a bold term. I've got subheadings. It's giving me structure. Oh, and look at these nice code fragments. Now, the way it's rendered, the exact colors, the fonts, that is specific to whatever website, in this case, the ChatGPT website. But the underlying content, once this finishes generating that we can look at, the underlying content is just Markdown syntax. And it's generating that for me. It makes it a lot easier to create blog posts because a lot of blogs just support Markdown right out of the box. Okay, so here's our nice blog post. Key terms are bolded, right? We got syntax, highlighting, all this stuff. If I copy the underlying Markdown, I'll take it over here. This is a Markdown editor. You can see that it actually generated the text correctly, right? Not just the actual words, but it puts the Markdown syntax in there. It's making me code blocks using the special syntax. It's creating bulleted lists. It's using headings. And it's just a really nice, quick way to get structure in your content. So that's how we can use Markdown. You can also provide Markdown as an input, of course. You can tell it, here's some Markdown. I want you to, tweak the content, but keep it as Markdown or do something else with it. And of course, it also supports tables, as we previously learned. While we're on the topic of output formatting and input formatting for that matter, I want to show a couple of other examples. So ChatGPT can work with pretty much any formatting you can think of, any standard format, including things like CSV. So if I ask it to, generate me a data set of, 10 countries with their names, populations, it's going to complain that it only has populations as of the training cutoff in 2021, which is okay. And then we'll say GDP maybe. Let's just go there. Let's see what it starts with. Yeah, the knowledge cutoff of 2021. Okay, so it gives me this nested list structure again. So instead, I could say, give me a Markdown table, as we've already seen. Or I could say, output a CSV, or output the data in a CSV format, comma separated values. This works well if you want to plug it into something like a spreadsheet, Excel, or if you want to plug it into pandas in Python or any sort of programming language. CSV is often a very easy way to do that. So that's one example. I can also give it data in CSV format. Of course, I'll tell it, here's a CSV formatted data set, do X with it. Another thing that I can do is tell it to generate JSON. We've seen this once or twice. JSON is JavaScript object notation. So I'll just use the same prompt. I'll just follow up and say, can you now generate the same data set in JSON format? And this is going to be the same information, but presented in JavaScript object notation, which is a bunch of key value pairs, country, China, population in millions, 1,434 million population. So it's the same information, just different formats. That's all I want to show you. So you can work with tables, you can work with CSV, you can work with JSON, and pretty much any other format that you can come up with, including your own custom format. Right, we've seen you can provide an example template and say, this is what I want you to output the data as. Use this crazy format where you use arrows or you use smiley faces to separate each character. You can totally do that. It's not that useful. You typically want to use pre-established or predefined formats, but it's pretty flexible. This next tip is also a pretty straightforward one that might seem obvious, but the concept is that it's generally better to write multiple single-purpose prompts in a sequential order instead of a single multiple goal prompt. So instead of one prompt that says, write me a title for a blog post, an outline for a blog post, an abstract for the blog post, a meta description, and then write the blog post all at once, which ChatGPT could do. It can take these complex prompts and handle everything at once. Instead of doing that, it generally works better and gives you better results if you split the tasks up into smaller pieces. So first, write me an outline. Second, write me a title for this blog post. Third, use this outline and this title, write the actual blog post. And this is especially useful when you're dealing with code-related tasks, writing applications, or it's not great at writing full applications, but writing features and multiple files, it's not great when you try and get it to do everything at once. The models just don't perform very well compared to providing a sequential list of tasks one at a time. So let's take this example. You are a blog post generating assistant. I am a ski instructor with a blog where I share tips to help people improve their skiing. Help me generate a blog post about common mistakes that skiers make. And then there's multiple steps. Follow these instructions. Generate an outline for the blog post. Then generate a 2-sentence abstract, or maybe we'll just skip that. Generate a title and subtitle for the blog post. Generate the actual blog post text. Those are the 3 tasks. It will probably do just fine if I hit enter right now and I have it do all of this at once. but it leads to better results if instead I break it up. And I'll just start with having it generate an outline for the blog post. And this way I can also tweak the blog post or the outline myself. If I'm unhappy with it, I can give it feedback, and I'm not, wasting a bunch of time where it's writing a full blog post every time. I can figure out the outline. Am I happy with this? Introduction, understanding skiing basics. Common mistake 1, leaning back. Mistake 2, over-tightening boots. Mistake 3, neglecting the pole plant. Mistake 4, incorrect weight distribution. Mistake 5, and then conclusion and a call to action. So it's looking pretty good, but I can still tweak it. Because I split things up into this incremental prompt, I can intervene and say, let's remove the lack of fitness preparation. Maybe some of my readers won't be happy to hear me say that, you're out of shape. So I'm going to skip that one. Let's remove the common mistake number 5, lack of fitness preparation. Okay. And then it regenerates this, and I'll fast forward once this finishes, but it should now exclude that section. I made some changes to the outline. Okay, it's about to finish up, and it skipped common mistake 5. That's gone. All right, so now I can move on to the next step, and I'll generate the blog post first, and then the title, I think. So I'll say something like, using the above outline, generate the full blog post. Use Markdown formatting and bold any keywords and phrases. And I'll let this go. It gave me a title, but after it finishes writing the entire blog post, we'll then add our final piece to the prompt, or the final part of the incremental prompt, which is generate a title based on this post. And again, we could have done this all in one go, just one massive prompt. Make me an outline, make me a title, make me a blog post, and anything else. Generally, it performs better if you break it up. And it gives us, the user, an opportunity to step in, to intervene, to fix things, and give feedback along the way. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that, although it didn't quite finish. There we go. It's about to finish now. And are we good? Let's say I'm happy with it, but of course I could read it and say I want it to adjust the tone. I want it to change, the formatting, or whatever I want. I can intervene here, but I'll add the last piece. Let's come up with a better, maybe more catchy title and subtitle for the above post. Slope savvy, dodging the top 4 skiing pitfalls for stellar performance. That's not bad. I could also say generate me 5 catchier titles and subtitles. And that's pretty much all there is to this concept of incremental prompting. It's honestly very simple. It's just taking a big prompt that has a bunch of steps and splitting that into smaller subprompts that you run one at a time instead of all at once. The next technique we'll look at is self-criticism. There's not really an established name for this, but that's basically what we're asking the model to do. We're going to ask it to criticize its own output. So if I ask it to write me a blog post on the ski runs with the silliest names in the country, it will generate the blog post. And then afterwards, I can say, can you improve the blog post? Tell me how. What suggestions do you have? And it's criticizing its own output that it generated. So here's a blog post I had it generate me on technical interviews, how to prepare for coding interviews. Here it is. It gives me an abstract and then the blog post itself. So after it finishes, I'm now going to say, can you improve upon the blog post you just wrote? How? And let's just try that. And it will come up with some other suggestions. It can be enhanced by providing more details and examples. It can make it more practical and actionable. We can also add relevant resources and tips for each section. So here's the improved version. It's going to take a while to finish because it's kind of a long post that it's writing. So it made a bunch of changes. It now provides, I'm still getting the reasoning, by the way. I asked it to explain its reasoning every time it changes. It's providing specific resources, highlights the importance of iterative learning. There's a new section on post-interview reflection right here, and it provides more practical advice. And I could also even follow up by saying, what changes did you suggest? What changes did you implement if I wasn't sure exactly what it did? But it's all about additional resources. So it included online resources in every section. We can actually see this if we take a look at one of these sections. It's mentioning LeetCode and HackerRank or Pramp and interviewing.io. It actually includes specific resources. Anyway, that's just a technique that you can use to enhance the output that you get. One thing that I would say I'm not thrilled about is that I said, can you improve upon the blog post that you just wrote? How? I probably should have rephrased this so that it didn't actually rewrite the entire blog post, because maybe I don't want it to rewrite it. I want to see what its plan is. So maybe I could do something like, can you suggest a plan for improving the blog post? Don't actually change the post yet. Just tell me the specific changes and suggestions you would make to improve it. And this might give me a better quality result where it doesn't actually try rewriting the post just yet. It will give me some specific details, and then I can decide, do I want to add personal anecdotes? Do I want to add visuals? And then I can ask it to do those things. Anyway, that's asking it to be critical of its own output.